The late afternoon sun cast long, gentle shadows across the neatly manicured lawns of Cypress Grove. On the porch at number 124, Sarah stood swaying gently, her 1-week-old son Liam swaddled against her chest. The weight of him was still a new, profound reality. Exhaustion seeped into her bones, a deep fatigue that a few hours of fractured sleep couldn't touch, but was mingled with a ferocious love that made her throat tight. The crisp autumn air was a brief, necessary escape from the stuffy house, a moment to feel like a person, not just a milk-producing, sleep-deprived vessel. The slam of a screen door shattered the peace. Sarah's heart sank before she even turned. Marching across the perfectly edged lawn separating their properties was Brenda Carlson, the HOA president. To the residents, she was simply Karen, a force of nature armed with binder bylaws and a perpetual frown. Brenda had previously cited Sarah for a wilting petunia and for leaving her garbage cans at the curb an hour too long. Sarah had hoped the arrival of a newborn would grant her a temporary reprieve. She was wrong. Brenda stopped at the foot of the porch steps, her hands on her hips. Her expression wasn't its usual pinched disapproval. It was something colder, more unhinged. "Sarah," she began, her voice sharp enough to make Liam stir. "There's a matter of unauthorized residence." Sarah blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, Brenda. What are you talking about?" "The bylaws, Article 7, Section 4, Brenda recited, her eyes narrowing. "All permanent residents must be pre-registered with the HOA board for approval. You failed to submit Form 12B for this edition." She gestured dismissively at the bundle in Sarah's arms. A disbelieving laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "You can't be serious. This is my son. He's a baby, not a new patio set." "The rules are the rules," Brenda insisted, her voice rising. "This community has standards. We can't have just anyone moving in causing noise, decreasing property values." Her gaze fixed on Liam with unnerving intensity. "That child doesn't belong here. Hand him over so we can sort this out properly." The words hung in the air, monstrous and absurd. "Hand him over?" Sarah repeated, her voice a whisper. She instinctively tightened her arms around Liam, stepping back until her spine pressed against the front door. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through her exhaustion. This was beyond a power trip. This was delusion. What Brenda didn't see was a figure who had appeared silently in the doorway behind Sarah. Mark, still in his sweatpants, had been watching from the window, a U.S. Navy SEAL. He was trained to assess threats in a microsecond. He saw the aggressive posture, the invasion of personal space, and the sheer terror on his wife's face. He didn't yell. He didn't storm. He simply moved, placing himself between his family and Brenda with a quiet, unnerving grace that was more intimidating than any shout. He was barefoot, but his stance was that of a man standing on the deck of a warship. "Brenda," Mark said, his voice low and lethally calm. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that sucked all the air out of the confrontation. Brenda faltered, her confidence flickering for the first time. "Mark, this is HOA business. Your wife is in violation." "The only violation happening is you trespassing on my property and threatening my wife and child," Mark interrupted, his eyes locked on hers. There was no anger in his tone, only absolute, unshakable certainty. "You have 3 seconds to get off my porch and return to your property. If you take one step toward my family again, the next conversation you have will be with the police. And I can assure you, they will take my statement very, very seriously." The world seemed to hold its breath. The color drained from Brenda's face. The mask of HOA authority crumbled, revealing a foolish, frightened woman who had finally pushed too far. Without another word, she turned on her heel and practically fled across the lawn. The story, of course, didn't end there. It spread through Cypress Grove like wildfire, forever recasting Brenda as the woman who tried to confiscate a Navy SEAL's baby. The power trip was over. And for Sarah, standing safely inside the circle of her husband's arms, the porch became a place of peace once more, guarded by the quietest, most formidable force the neighborhood had ever seen. The move to Sycamore Bend was supposed to be a sanctuary. For Marcus, a decorated Navy SEAL whose life had been measured in gunfire and desert sand for the better part of a decade, the quiet, Tree-lined streets represented a hard-won peace. He envisioned backyard barbecues, teaching his son to ride a bike, and profound, simple luxury of safety. His wife, Alana, a nurse whose hands had comforted countless patients, saw it as a nurturing ground. She pictured playdates in the park and a community where their child would thrive. The boxes were still stacked high, but the nursery was perfect, a soft-lit haven for their newborn son, Elijah. The problem, however, had been watching them from the moment the moving truck arrived. Her name was Brenda Covington, but in the hushed conversations over backyard fences, she was simply Karen. She was the undisputed monarch of the Sycamore Bend HOA, a woman who wielded a 3-ring binder bylaws like a scepter. Her domain was aesthetics and control, the precise shade of beige for trim, the mandated grass height, the prohibition of work vans parked overnight. She believed she owned not just her property, but the very character of a neighborhood. And from her vantage point, Marcus and Alana did not fit the character she had meticulously curated. She didn't like that Marcus was a broad-shouldered black man with a quiet intensity that her authority couldn't penetrate. She didn't like that Alana, with her warm, intelligent eyes and cascade of curls, was of mixed race. Their very presence felt like a defiance of her narrow worldview. While other neighbors received a curt welcome packet, Marcus and Alana received a volley of nitpicking violations, a welcome mat deemed too brightly colored, a porch swing that allegedly violated a sightline rule. But when Alana gave birth to Elijah, Brenda's quiet prejudice curdled into something darker, more obsessive. The baby, with his beautiful color skin and a head of soft, dark curls, became a symbol of everything she feared. Change, a future she couldn't control. In her warped logic, his presence wasn't just a violation of bylaws, but contamination of her idealized, homogeneous community. The confrontation came on a Tuesday. Alana was on the porch, swaying with Elijah in her arms, trying to soothe his fussing. The fatigue was a physical weight, but the love was heavier, an anchor. Suddenly, Brenda was there, marching up their walkway with a purpose that made Alana's blood run cold. "Alana," Brenda said, her voice clipped, "we have a serious issue." "Brenda, now is not a good time," Alana replied, her voice weary but firm. "It's about him," Brenda said, her eyes fixed on the baby with disturbing intensity. "There's been no application for residency approval. The rules are clear. All new occupants must be vetted and approved by the board." Alana stared, disbelief momentarily overriding her exhaustion. "He's a 1-week-old infant. He's my son." "This neighborhood has standards," Brenda continued, her voice rising shrilly. "We have a certain demographic. That child," she pointed a trembling finger, "does not belong here. You need to hand him over so we can sort this out with the proper authorities." The words, "hand him over," echoed in the stillness. A primal fear, cold and sharp, seized Alana. She clutched Elijah tighter, stepping backward. What Brenda didn't see was Marcus, who had appeared in the doorway like a shadow. He had been unpacking the nursery, his soldier's instincts always half-tuned to the sounds of his family. He saw his wife's terror, the invasive posture of the woman on his porch, and heard the monstrous demand. For a man trained to neutralize threats in high-stakes raids, the assessment was instantaneous and absolute. He moved without a sound, placing his body as a shield between his family and Brenda. He wore a simple t-shirt, but his presence filled the space, charged and dangerous. "Brenda," Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but was low, flat, and carried the absolute authority of a man who commanded life-and-death situations. It was a tone that brooked no argument. Brenda flinched, her confidence cracking. "Marcus, this is an HOA matter. Your wife is non-compliant." "You are on my property," Marcus interrupted, his eyes locked on hers, unblinking. "You are harassing my wife and threatening my infant son. This conversation is over. You will turn around, walk back to your house, and you will never approach my family again. If you do, the next person you speak to will be a police officer, and I will press every charge available to me." The veneer of HOA power shattered completely. Under the weight of his calm, terrifying certainty, Brenda Covington was just a bigoted woman who had finally met an immovable object. Muttering incoherently, she retreated. Her retreat as hurried and undignified as her advance had been arrogant. In the safe circle of Marcus's arms, Alana finally exhaled. The quiet of Sycamore Bend returned, but it was different now. It wasn't just peace. It was territory that had been decisively and finally defended. The afternoon sun was a gentle blessing, warming the painted boards of the porch where Alana stood. Little Elijah, swaddled in a soft yellow blanket, was finally asleep against her chest, his tiny breaths a quiet rhythm against the hum of a distant lawnmower. For the first time in days, Alana felt a sliver of peace. She closed her eyes, tilting her face to the sky, rocking slowly from heel to toe. This was the life they had fought for, the quiet moment she had clung to during Marcus's long deployments. The peace shattered with the sharp click of a gate latch. Alana's eyes snapped open to see Brenda Covington marching across the street with the grim purpose of an advancing tank. Her trademark scowl was deeper than usual, and the afternoon sun glinted off the clipboard she held like a shield. She didn't follow the path to the porch steps. She cut directly across the immaculate lawn, a violation of her own sacred rules. There was no greeting, no pretense of civility. Brenda stopped a few feet away, her eyes skipping over Alana as if she were invisible and locking onto the bundle in her arms. "I need to see proof of that child's residency," Brenda stated, her voice cutting through the quiet. She tapped the clipboard. "We have strict bylaws. We can't have undocumented strangers disrupting the community's harmony." Alana froze, the word so absurd they took a moment to register. "Excuse me," she finally managed, her voice tight. "This is my son. He's a newborn. What kind of proof could you possibly need?" "Birth certificate. Notarized residency forms. The rules apply to everyone," Brenda insisted, her gaze unwavering. A cold knot tightened in Alana's stomach. This was beyond a power trip. It was a targeted, personal attack. Brenda's eyes, filled with a mixture of suspicion and vitriol, betrayed her true motive. Then she doubled down, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Frankly, given the circumstances, some of us are wondering if this child is even really yours. Perhaps you're harboring him illegally. This needs to be sorted out immediately." The accusation was so vile, so inhuman, that Alana felt the air leave her lungs. But what happened next would be seared into her memory forever. Brenda Covington, the HOA president, held out her arms, her fingers twitching impatiently. "Hand him over," she demanded. "I'll take him to the authorities myself to get this straightened out." Time seemed to slow. The world narrowed to the space between them, the insane, outstretched arms and her precious, sleeping son. A primal, ferocious instinct surged through Alana's exhaustion. She clutched Elijah so tightly he stirred with a soft whimper, shielding him with her entire body as she stumbled back a step. "You're insane," she whispered, the words barely audible, choked with a mixture of terror and rage. That's when a familiar rumble of Marcus's truck echoed down the street. The sound broke the surreal spell. Brenda's head snapped toward the driveway as the black Ford F-150 pulled in, its engine cutting off with a final growl. The driver's door opened, and Marcus stepped out. He wasn't in uniform. He wore faded jeans and a gray T-shirt that stretched across his shoulders. But he moved with the same deliberate, economical grace he used on a mission. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. His wife's pale, terrified face, her protective stance, and the unfamiliar woman standing aggressively close on his porch. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply started walking toward them, each step measured and heavy with intent. The air on the porch seemed to change, growing thick and charged. Brenda, for the first time, looked uncertain. The clipboard lowered slightly. Marcus reached the foot of the steps. His eyes, dark and impossibly calm, locked onto Brenda. He didn't even look at Alana. His silent presence was a question already answered, a declaration of support that needed no words. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked. His voice was quiet, deceptively soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The clipboard trembled in her hand. The woman who had moments ago demanded a newborn baby now found herself unable to speak under the gaze of the child's father. The unshakable confidence born of petty power evaporated. leaving only the stark, chilling realization that she had crossed a line for which there was no return. The fresh start had just been defended, not with a shout, but with a silence that screamed louder than any weapon. The crunch of gravel under his tires was the only sound Marcus registered before the scene imprinted itself on his mind with the chilling clarity of a tactical briefing. His wife, Alana, was backed against the front door, her body curved protectively around their son. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, the kind he'd sworn he'd never see in his own home. And there, standing on their porch as if she had every right, was Brenda Covington. Her finger was jabbed toward Alana, a gesture of ownership so arrogant it made the blood hum in his veins. He was out of the truck in one fluid motion, the door closing with a soft, definitive thud that made Brenda's head snap toward him. The air itself felt charged, thick with a hostility that had no place on a sunny suburban afternoon. Marcus asked. His voice was calm, a flat, controlled lake, but beneath the surface was an edge of razor wire, a promise of consequence that made Brenda's smug posture falter for a fraction of a second. She recovered quickly, puffing out her chest, the clipboard held like a royal decree. "Yes, there's a problem," she sneered, her voice shrill. "Your wife refuses to prove that baby belongs here. This is a violation of community standards. I demand you hand him over to the HOA until this matter is cleared up." The words hung in the air, so grotesque and unbelievable that for a second, there was only silence. The birds had stopped singing. The distant lawnmower had ceased. The world held its breath. Then Marcus laughed. It wasn't a laugh of humor, but a low, dangerous sound that seemed to vibrate from the ground up. It was the sound of a man looking into the abyss of someone's stupidity and finding it both pathetic and enraging. He took a single step forward, and though he was still on the path below the porch, he seemed to loom over her. Every ounce of his Navy SEAL training, the stillness, the focused intensity, the absolute confidence in controlling a space, radiated from him. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence was the weapon. "Listen carefully," he said, his eyes locking onto hers, pinning her in place. "That is my son, my blood, my family." He enunciated each word, driving them home like hammer strikes. "And no one, especially you, will ever put a hand on him. You don't get to demand. You don't get to threaten. And you will never, ever touch what isn't yours." Brenda tried to bluster, to reclaim the authority of her clipboard. Her voice, however, betrayed her, wavering like a reed in a strong wind. I'll call the police. I'll have you removed from this property. You're the one causing a disturbance." A grim, cold smile touched Marcus's lips. He leaned in slightly, a predator closing the final distance. His voice dropped, becoming steady as polished steel, each word delivered with the precision of a sniper's round. "Good idea," he said, his tone almost conversational. "Let's call them. Please, do it right now. Because I'd love for them to hear how you, an HOA president, just attempted to kidnap a 1-week-old infant from his mother's arms on his own porch. I'd love to explain how you demanded she hand over my child. I'm sure the terms attempted kidnapping, harassment, and ethnic intimidation will make for a very interesting police report." The color drained from Brenda's face, so completely it was as if a switch had been flipped. Her clipboard clattered to the porch floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The reality of the situation, stripped of her self-bestowed authority and viewed through the lens of actual law, crashed down upon her. She wasn't a ruler enforcing bylaws. She was a woman who had just committed a monstrous act. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. With a strangled gasp, she turned and fled, stumbling down the steps and across the lawn without a backward glance, her retreat as frantic and undignified as her invasion had been bold. Marcus watched her go until she disappeared into her own house. Then, and only then, did he turn to Alana. He moved up the steps and wrapped his arms around his wife and son, his large hand cradling the back of Elijah's head. The silence that returned to the porch was no longer charged with fear, but filled with a hard-won, fiercely protected peace. The confrontation on the porch did not happen in a vacuum. From behind the pristine curtains of the house across the street, a neighbor had been watching, her phone already recording Brenda's initial aggressive approach. Another neighbor, watering his petunias, had stopped, hose in hand, his mouth agape at the unfolding scene. By the time Marcus's truck pulled in, several phones were raised, their lenses silently capturing every damning word. Within an hour of Brenda's frantic retreat, the video was buzzing in the Sycamore Bend neighborhood group chat. It was raw, unedited, and utterly conclusive. There was no spin, no HOA bylaw justification that could explain away what everyone saw. Brenda Covington, finger jabbing, demanding a newborn baby from his terrified mother. They heard her insane accusation of harboring illegally, and they saw her actually hold out her arms to take the child. The image of Marcus, a tower of calm, lethal authority, defended his family only highlighted the grotesque nature of her actions. The myth of the protector of rules shattered, revealing the petty, racist bully beneath. When a police cruiser arrived later that afternoon, summoned by a furious neighbor who'd forwarded the video directly to the non-emergency line, the situation was already clear. Marcus, standing on his porch with Alana beside him, relayed the facts with the concise clarity of a military debrief. Alana, her voice steadier now, gave her statement, the raw emotion in her account corroborated by the digital evidence. The officers, after viewing the video on a neighbor's phone, needed no further convincing. They walked next door to Brenda's house. Through the front window, neighbors could see her gesturing wildly, her face flushed. But the video was an unassailable truth. The officers issued a formal warning for harassment and threats. They made it unequivocally clear that any further contact with the family would result in immediate arrest for stalking and potentially attempted kidnapping. The law, which Brenda had always pretended to wield, was now poised firmly against her. The HOA board, long cowed by Brenda's domineering style, found its collective spine. Emboldened by the community outrage and fearing legal liability, they called an emergency meeting that evening. The video was played again. There were no speeches, no debates. A vote was called. By the end of the week, a formal letter was delivered to Brenda Covington. She was removed as president of the Sycamore Bend HOA, effective immediately. The fallout from Marcus and Alana was the opposite of what Brenda had intended. Instead of isolation, they found a community eager to atone for its past silence. The next day, a procession of neighbors began to appear on their porch, not with complaints, but with warm casseroles, bags of fresh groceries, and beautifully wrapped gifts for baby Elijah. A retired couple offered to babysit anytime. The man who had recorded the video, a quiet IT specialist, came over to personally install a state-of-the-art security camera system at the front of their house, free of charge. The same neighbors who had once averted their eyes from Brenda's petty tyranny now stood firmly, openly, behind the young family. They had witnessed a line being crossed, and in its wake, they discovered a shared sense of decency. Karen had thought she could intimidate a vulnerable new mother. She believed she could bully a family she deemed other out of what she considered her domain. But her fatal error was a profound miscalculation of her opponent. She had picked a fight with a man who had faced enemies in mountains and deserts, who understood true threat and true courage. Marcus hadn't needed to throw a punch or raise his voice. He had simply stood his ground, defended what was his, and in doing so, he hadn't just protected his family. He had exposed a poison in the community and catalyzed its cleansing. He won more than a confrontation. He won profound and lasting respect of every single person on the street.